Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Tuesday, January 21st, and for today's headlines we have Biden pardons Fauci, Milley, and members of January 6 panel. Indigenous activist Leonard Peltier granted clemency by President Biden. Here are Trump's expected executive orders. A meteorite is caught on camera as it crashes outside a front door. Cecile Richards, former Planned Parenthood president, dies at 67. Biden pardons Fauci, Milley, and members of January 6 panel. In an extraordinary move, hours before leaving office on Monday, President Biden said he'd issued pardons to retired General Mark Milley, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the members of Congress and staff who served on the January 6 committee, and the U.S. Capitol and Washington, D.C. police officers who testified before that committee. Biden said the preemptive pardons were needed because of threats of unjustified and politically motivated prosecutions in the incoming administration. The issuance of these pardons should not be mistaken as an acknowledgement that any individual engaged in any wrongdoing, nor should acceptance be misconstrued as an admission of guilt for any offense. Biden said in a statement issued hours before President-elect Donald Trump takes the oath of office. Biden said exceptional circumstances has prompted the pardons. Even when individuals have done nothing wrong, and in fact have done the right thing, and will ultimately be exonerated, the mere fact of being investigated or prosecuted can irreparably damage reputations and finances, he said. It is not clear that the incoming Trump administration intends to prosecute the individuals. Pam Bondi, Trump's nominee for Attorney General, and last week during her confirmation hearing that there wouldn't be a political prosecutions on her watch. But Trump's nominee for FBI Director, Kash Patel, has called for many Trump's opponents to be investigated or prosecuted. Fauci was a leading figure in the U.S. response to the COVID-19 pandemic. An infectious disease specialist at the National Institute of Health, he encouraged people to wear masks and social distance, but Trump's allies accused him of covering up the alleged real causes of COVID. Trump called Fauci a disaster, and Fauci has been investigated by congressional Republicans. In a statement, Fauci said, "Throughout my career, I have been motivated by one simple goal, to improve the health and lives of humankind," noting that he served under presidents of both parties from Ronald Reagan to President Biden. "I believe and hope that my legacy is that of a dedicated and accomplished physician, scientist, and public health official who, with the help of many teams of skilled and distinguished colleagues, saved millions of lives in the United States and around the world," Fauci said. Milley was the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff during Trump's first term and later called Trump fascist to the core. In a book by journalist Bob Woodward, Trump has said he should be executed. In a statement, Milley thanked the president for the pardon, saying he was grateful to not have to put family and friends through any potential legal battle. "After 43 years of faithful service in uniform to our nation, protecting and defending the Constitution, I do not wish to spend whatever remaining time the Lord grants me fighting those who unjustly might seek retribution for perceived slights," he said. Biden said the members of the January 6 committee and law enforcement officials who testified before it were doing their job to shed light on the insurrection attempted by a mob of Trump supporters in 2021. Rather than accept accountability, those who perpetuated the January 6 attack have taken every opportunity to undermine and intimidate those who participated in the Select Committee in an attempt to rewrite history, erase the stain of January 6 for partisan gain, and seek revenge, including by threatening criminal prosecutions, Biden said. The leaders of the House Select January 6 Committee, Chairman Bennie Thompson, Democrat from Mississippi, and Republican Vice Chair Liz Cheney, said in a joint statement on behalf of the committee that they were grateful for the pardons. "These are indeed extraordinary circumstances, when public servants are pardoned to prevent false prosecution by the government for having worked faithfully as member of Congress to expose the facts of a months-long criminal effort to override the will of voters after the 2020 elections," they said. They also said they remain undeterred by threats of criminal violence or prosecution, and encouraged by the Constitution's sweeping speech and debate clause and the pardons. "We pray that our institutions will prevail over these coming 4 years, but their survival will undoubtedly require courage by their citizenry, those in elected office, and the press," they said. "The truth and the Constitution must prevail." For months, members of the January 6 committee had discussed the potential of Biden issuing preemptive pardons during calls behind closed doors. However, the group was split. For example, Thompson told NPR he welcomed a pardon from Biden, but by and large he was the committee's sole member that expressed that interest publicly. Maryland Democrat Representative Jamie Raskin was less clear on the plans earlier this month. "It's not up to me," he said. Staffers for the House Select January 6 committee were surprised by the news of the pardon. A congressional aide said they were sorting whether they needed to accept the pardon or how the process worked. There was plenty of confusion since the announcement didn't include names or specifics of what the pardon covered. However, the aide that was not authorized to speak on the record said staffers were relieved by the news in case the Trump administration did target the committee staff. In the end, it appears the panel's final report pardons will cover dozens of staffers. More than 50 were listed in the preliminary section of the panel's final report. It was also unclear if the pardons covered consultants and contractors also listed in the report. Indigenous activist Leon Peltier granted clemency by President Biden. One of his last official acts before leaving the White House, President Joe Biden released Leonard Peltier from prison. The action was an extraordinary move that ends a decades-long push by Indigenous activists, international religious leaders, and human rights organizations and Hollywood insiders who argue that the 80-year-old Native American activist was wrongly convicted. The commutation was widely opposed by law enforcement, who insisted that Peltier's actions were cold-blooded and that he should remain in prison for the rest of his life for murdering FBI agents Jack Kohler and Ronald Williams in 1975. The agent's death came at the time when tensions were high over a nationwide struggle between the U.S. government and activists for Native American civil and treaty rights. Tribal nations, Nobel Peace Laureates, former law enforcement officials, including the former U.S. Attorney whose office oversaw Mr. Peltier's prosecution and appeal, dozens of lawmakers, and human rights organizations strongly support granting Ms. Peltier clemency, citing his advanced age, illness, his close ties to and leadership in the Native American community, and the substantial length of time he's already spent in prison, said Biden in a statement today. Nick Tilson, executive director of NDN Collective, an Indigenous-led nonprofit, says Peltier's release is a historic moment that comes after many years of organizing and lobbying across the globe. Leonard Peltier now gets to go home. Every Indian person ever wanted to do was to go home and back to their people, and now he's going to have an opportunity to do that, Tilson said. To say this is overdue is an understatement, and the massive effort to push Leonard's freedom by so many is unparalleled, said Robert Guilford, a criminal defense attorney who has worked to secure Peltier's clemency for more than 4 years. Biden's action isn't a pardon that forgives Peltier's offense, but rather a combination which lessens his sentence and effectively frees him from prison. Peltier suffers from complications related to diseases, kidney disease, and near blindness, and his attorneys argue that he would not survive much longer in prison. Peltier has been held in Florida at Coleman 1, a federal detention center in Sumner County. He admitted shooting at the agents, but always maintained his innocence. "I did not kill those agents," Peltier told former Minnesota Public Radio broadcaster Gary Etchen in a 1991 interview. Peltier was working on appeal at that time. Peltier's latest bid for parole was denied last July. He wasn't eligible for another hearing until June 2026. Biden's move is certain to anger many in the law enforcement community. FBI Director Christopher Wray lobbied against Peltier's most recent parole request. Over the last 45 years, no fewer than 22 federal judges have evaluated the evidence and considered Peltier's legal arguments, Wray wrote in a letter opposing Peltier's 2024 parole request. Each has reached the same conclusion. Peltier's claims are meritless, and his convictions and sentence must stand. The FBI also discouraged past presidents from pardoning or granting clemency to Peltier. "They were down, they were wounded, they were helpless, and he shot them point blank," Mike Clark, president of the Society of Former Special Agents of FBI, told the Associated Press last summer. "It's a heinous crime." The July 2024 AP article also shared a photo from a demonstration on December 15, 2000, of 500 agents marching towards the White House, protesting clemency for Peltier. The agent carried a photo of Kohler and Williams. Kohler and Williams were shot on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota while serving an arrest warrant for someone. The shooting of the two agents followed a tense 2 years on the Pine Ridge Reservation. At the time, leader of the American Indian Movement demanded better treatment of Native Americans living on and off the reservation, including jobs, better health care, and education. AIM was founded in 1968 in Minneapolis during a nationwide struggle for civil rights. Peltier, a citizen of Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa in North Dakota, joined the movement in 1972. In February of 1973, the tension culminated at Wounded Knee when members of AIM and other indigenous people took over the town. The standoff between members of AIM and federal law enforcement lasted for 71 days. After the Wounded Knee occupation ended, a wave of violence overtook Pine Ridge. According to reports, more than 20 people were killed on the reservation. In the late morning of June 26, 1975, agents spotted and followed what was described as a red pickup truck. Peltier and a few other men were in the truck, which turned into Jumping Bull Ranch in Oglala, South Dakota, where Peltier and other A members were camping. A firefight ensued. Just before noon, agents radioed for backup, saying they were under fire and needed assistance. Other agents were miles away and also under arrest. Within minutes, both Kohler and Williams had been shot and killed. It took hours for their bodies to be recovered. According to the FBI, a total of 5 rounds had been fired from both Williams and Kohler's weapons. The agents' vehicles alone had 125 bullet holes. Williams was shot in the foot, his body and head, while Kohler was shot twice in the head after sustaining other bullet wounds, the FBI said. Williams' car was later taken as well as the agents' guns. The FBI alleges that Darrell Butler took Williams' handgun, Peltier took Kohler's, and Robert Robidoux took Kohler's rifle and shotgun. Another person was also killed in the gunfight. Joseph Bedell Stuntz Sr. was 23 years old and a tribal citizen originally from Forks and Port Angeles in Washington, according to the FBI reports. Stuntz was shot by FBI enforcement during the altercation. Butler, Peltier, and Robidoux were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and aiding and abetting. Peltier, who already had an outstanding warrant in an unlawful fight to avoid prosecution, fled to Canada. He was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list in 1975. In 1976, he was captured by Royal Canadian Mounted Police and was extradited to the United States. His trial took place a year later in Fargo, North Dakota. After a 5-week trial, Peltier was found guilty and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison. Butler and Robidoux were acquitted in 1976 on grounds of self-defense. Peltier's version of the event also changed over time. In the book written by Peter Maslin titled In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, Peltier said he was working on a car nowhere near Jumping Bull when the incident occurred. In another account, he said he was awakened by the sound of gunfire. In his 1999 memoir, Prison Writing, My Life is a Sundance, Peltier admitted to shooting at the agents but maintained he did not kill them. Advocates have called for Peltier's release for decades. Biden's actions come after years of public pressure from Native American and tribal groups. Earlier this month, a group of 120 former and current tribal elected leaders signed a letter asking Biden to release Peltier. Our standing in the world as a champion of freedom, justice, and human rights cannot be maintained in a system that allows Leonard Peltier to die in prison, read the letter from tribal elected officials published on NDN Collective's website. Activists with the American Indian Movement lobbied for Peltier's release since he was first imprisoned. A members, alongside the advocacy organization NDN Collective, walked from Minneapolis to D.C. as recently as 2022 to bring awareness to Peltier's case in his bid for clemency. His conviction and sentence also inspired international support ranging from the human rights group Amnesty International to United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. Others, including Pope Francis, Robert Redford, and the members of the band Rage Against the Machine, have also called for Peltier's release. The advocacy increased in the recent years as Peltier's health has worsened after spending more than half of his life behind bars. He's of old age and in poor health, and he poses little threat to society. If there was ever a case that merited compassionate release, Leonard Peltier's is it. U.S. Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat from Hawaii, and remarked on the floor of the U.S. Senate last month. It's exactly what that awesome power is for, to right a historic wrong, and if not that, then to show mercy and let an old man die with his family. Schatz was one of more than 24 members of Congress who wrote to Biden to urge him to rectify this grave injustice that has long troubled human rights activists and Native peoples. The letter was signed by several prominent Minnesota Democrats, including U.S. Senator Tina Smith and U.S. Representatives Ilhan Omar and Betty McCollum. Several of those who have called for Peltier's release have referenced other letter written by James Reynolds. A former federal prosecutor for the District of South Dakota, Reynolds' office led the first case against Peltier and a later appeal. In 2021, Reynolds wrote to Biden to say he believed the government had not made its case against Peltier. The former prosecutor expressed a sense of remorse for having put him behind bars. With time and the benefit of hindsight, I realized that the prosecution and continued incarceration of Mr. Peltier was and is unjust. We are not able to prove that Mr. Peltier personally committed any offense on the Pine Ridge residence, Reynolds wrote. Calls for lessening Peltier's sentence stretched back even further. In 1991, Gerald Henley, the late federal judge who penned the opinion of Peltier's 1986 appeal, wrote to the late Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, saying he believed that former President George W. Bush had a basis for shortening the Peltier sentence. The FBI used improper tactics in securing Peltier's extradition from Canada and in otherwise investigating and trying Peltier's case, Haney wrote. While Haney did not send the letter to former President George Bush himself, Haney granted permission to Inouye to share his letter with Bush. In 2017, an attorney for Peltier petitioned former President Obama for clemency in the final days of his term. Similar petitions were made to former presidents going back to President Jimmy Carter. Tilson, who organized, has purchased a home for Peltier to live in the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation, says this moment cannot be understated. I think that this moment is historic, really. It's emotional, because this represents 50 years of organizing, said Tilson. Here are Trump's expected executive orders. The incoming president's team said he would take a unilateral action on a variety of fronts during his first hours in office, including 10 executive orders cracking down on immigration and immigrants. President Trump on Monday will begin issuing a barrage of executive orders, including major steps to crack down on immigration and dismantle diversity initiatives in the federal government. His team told reporters kicking off his presidency with a muscular use of power intended to signal a sharp reversal from existing policies. Mr. Trump will also act unilaterally to end regulations aimed at encouraging the sale of electric vehicles enacted by the Biden administration, which he has dubbed a mandate, walk back protections for transgender students, and suspend refugee resettlement for at least 4 months, they said. The flurry of executive actions is an effort to roll back many of President Biden's most significant domestic policies, primarily on climate and immigration, while also reimposing a Trump agenda that would launch drilling and mining on natural resources and fundamentally upend the United States' global role as a sanctuary for refugees and immigrants. Mr. Trump has promised a burst of action, and his inaugural speech said he would issue a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, he said, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It was unclear how many directives Mr. Trump intended to sign on Monday afternoon, but he has promised close to 100 in the coming days. Some of these orders are almost certain to be challenged in court, and others will be largely symbolic. But taken together, they will amount to a sharp turn in direction after the Biden administration in an effort to begin to make good on his campaign promises and initial steps towards breaking what he and his aides see as a deep state effort to thwart his agenda. Top advisors briefed reporters on many of them. Here are some of the major elements. Immigration and the border. Close the border to asylum-seeking migrants. Declare an end to birthright citizenship, a guarantee granted by the 14th Amendment for the children of undocumented immigrants. The president cannot change the Constitution on his own, so it is not yet clear how Trump plans to withhold the benefits of citizenship to a group of people born in the United States. The move is all but certain to be challenged in court. Involve the U.S. military and border security. This would draw immediate legal actions because of the strict limits in American law for how the armed forces can be deployed inside the country. Declare migrant crossings along the U.S.-Mexico border to be a national emergency, which will allow Mr. Trump to unilaterally unlock federal funding for border wall construction without approval from Congress for stricter enforcement efforts. Designate drug cartels as global terrorists. Federal workforce. End remote work policies and order many agencies back to the office 4 to 5 days a week. Gender and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Establish biological sex definitions for federal workers and as part of a revised Title IX guidance to schools. Remove protections for transgender students in federal prisons, transgender people in federal prisons. Remove protections for transgender migrants in U.S. custody. Tariffs and trade. Direct federal agencies to begin investigation into trade practices, including trade deficits, unfair currency practices, counterfeit goods, and a special exemption that allows low-value goods to come into the United States tariff-free. Assess China's compliance with the trade deal Mr. Trump signed in 2020, as well as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which Trump signed in 2020 to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement. Order the government to assess the feasibility of creating an external revenue service to collect tariffs and duties. Energy and the environment. Declare a national energy emergency, which could allow him to unlock powers to speed permitting for pipelines and power plants. order the federal government to roll back regulations that impede domestic energy production, sign an intention to loosen the limits on tailpipe pollution and fuel economy standards, which Mr. Trump refers to as an electric vehicle mandate, roll back energy-efficient regulations for dishwashers, shower heads, and gas stoves, open the Alaska wilderness to more oil and gas drilling, eliminate environmental justice programs across the government, which are aimed at protecting poor communities from excess pollution, delaying the ban on TikTok. Mr. Trump vowed early Sunday to issue an executive order to give ByteDance, TikTok's Chinese owner, more time to make a sale and satisfy a law that would ban it in the United States. The incoming White House officials previewing Mr. Trump's executive actions on Monday did not address any executive action on the app. A meteorite is caught on camera as it crashes outside a front door. Home security camera footage shows a puff of smoke, with the sound of an explosion included, as a space rock lands in Canada. A geologist said it was a rare recording. A couple in Canada were returning home from walking their dog some months ago when they found a burst of dusty debris on their walkway.
5, 4.
They turned to the security camera footage for answers and found it showed a mysterious puff of smoke appearing on the tidy walkway where the mystery splotch was. The source of the splotch was officially registered on Monday as a Charlottetown meteorite named after the city on Prince Edward Island in eastern Canada where it landed. Only 69 meteorites have been found and registered in the country, and this is the first recorded in Prince Edward Island, according to the Meteorological Society, an organization that records all known meteorites. The Charlottetown meteorite was more significant because of the security camera footage, said Chris Haird, a professor at the University of Alberta and its curator of its meteorite collection. To the best of my knowledge, it is the first time that a meteorite hitting the surface of the Earth has been recorded on video with the sound, said Dr. Hurd, who identified the space rock after the couple sent the video to the University of Alberta's meteorite reporting system. About 99.9% of the rocks that people have submitted to this reporting system have turned out not to be meteorites, Dr. Hurd said. When he saw the video from July 25, 2024, which showed a small explosion with a sound resembling crackling ice or glass, he thought what it documented was significant. For the homeowner, Joe Verdanum, the video did not just capture something of value to science, but also recorded a brush with luck. Just before the meteorite hit, Mr. Verdanum and his partner, Laura Kelly, had left the home to walk their dogs, the Canadian Press and news agency reported. I was standing literally over the exact spot where the meteorite hit just a couple minutes later, Mr. Vendum said. I had been thinking about it a lot, because when you have a near-death experience, it kind of shocks you. In another fortuitous bit of timing, the meteorite crashed about 10 days before Dr. Hurd was scheduled to go to Prince Edward Island for a family vacation. Dr. Hurd took a side trip with his wife, older son, and his son girlfriend to meet Mr. Verdanum and Miss Kelly and to evaluate the debris they had collected. Using a home kitchen scale and a teaspoon, Dr. Hurd took measurements with the help of his son. It is rare to find a meteorite and to capture its fall on Earth, but Dr. Hurd said when it literally ends up on your front doorstep, it's obviously a lot easier. Cecile Richards, former Planned Parenthood president, dies at 67. Ms. Richards oversaw the United States' largest provider of reproductive health care and sex education from 2006 to 2018. Cecile Richards, a former president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and one of the country's most well-known defenders of abortion rights, died on Monday. She was 67. Ms. Richards was diagnosed in 2023 with glioblastoma, a type of brain tumor. She died at home, her family said in a statement. A former political organizer, Ms. Richards, was a daughter of former Governor Ann Richards of Texas. Ms. Richards was the president of Planned Parenthood from 2006 to 2018, overseeing the country's largest provider of reproductive health care and sex education during a period in which the care it offered was most under attack, during President George W. Bush and again under President Donald J. Trump. She helped fend off an onslaught of attempts by Republican-controlled state legislators to pass laws to restrict access or cut funding. If I had one regret from my time leading Planned Parenthood, is that we believed that providing vital health care with public opinion on our side would be enough to overcome the political onslaught Ms. Richards wrote in an essay in the New York Times in 2022. I underestimated the callousness of the Republican Party and its willingness to trade off the rights of women for political expediency. Her final project was called Abortion in America, and it was dedicated to using TikTok and Instagram to push out stories of abortion beyond traditional media. I've been really fortunate in my life to always be able to work that had meaning for me and meaning for the people I care for, she said in an interview with the Times last year. Luck is a loaded word, but I feel really lucky. She wore a stack of friendship bracelets, one which read, "Keep going." That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.